Hello everybody, this was meant to be a Facebook Live video, but because of some technical mishaps, probably my fault, I'll take the blame there, we weren't able to successfully do a Facebook Live video. We are, however, recording this and you're watching this because it's on YouTube, so we really hope you enjoy the video. My name's Jay, I'm a mental health nurse and cognitive behavioural therapist trainee. I want to talk about mental health because it's something that everybody has and something that we don't talk about enough. With me today to have this conversation is Kiwi. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi there, my name's Kiwi. I'm a police officer. I'm here to talk to Jay today about mental health wellbeing. I've been through my own challenges, which I'll talk about in a second, but I'm really passionate about raising the awareness around mental health wellbeing, as Jay is. So two kindred spirits to come together to hopefully change the world.
Yeah, we hope. So I'm just going to stop the share screen a second. And our plan for today really is to be able to deliver 2 bits of input. I'll speak through some ideas and some concepts that might be helpful around looking after your own mental health, and then Kiwi's going to explain about a little bit about his story and his experiences around mental health and what we can really learn from that and take from that. I suppose this is in the context of a global pandemic that is affecting us all, really. So although the advice and ideas that we share tonight are pretty generic and pretty wide-ranging, I suppose we've got to think about it in the context of the pandemic and how we can especially look after ourselves at this time. The first thing I want to do really is to just very briefly talk about what mental health is, because very often you hear people talk about mental health and maybe there's some ideas to look after your mental health, but sometimes we miss out the bit where we define and talk about what mental health is. And if we don't have those kind of very basic building blocks, it's really hard then to learn and to develop better understandings for how to look after yourself, really. And we're not coming at this going to be like, right, we're the experts, we know everything. We're just simply 2 people with some experiences that want to share some ideas and hopefully be helpful. Let us know what you think in the comments, and do get in touch if you have any questions at all. We're more than happy to answer those. So mental health, to start with, is really importantly something we all have. Every single one of us that watches this video, every single one of us on this planet has mental health, just as we have physical health. And just as we have mental health and physical health, we also have social health. So there's 3 kind of aspects of health that come together to form the kind of broad understanding of what health is. And really importantly, having these 3 things, mental, physical and social, means that if you remove one of them, you can't have health. So we can't really understand what health is and what well-being is unless we also acknowledge and talk about mental health. It's about how we think, so our cognitions, our processes, the way we interpret the world, the way we understand it, and the beliefs that we have. It's how we feel, often associated with heart, but it's a head thing as well, of course. And it's also about how we behave and how we put ourselves across. And it's also about our physical health. And something we'll talk about a little bit later is the overlap between physical and mental health. But it's all those things combined, really. So one of the biggest things right at the moment that's important for the pandemic is that our health, mental, physical and social, will greatly be affected by the pandemic. For some people that might be a huge change, that it's really life-changing, and for some people it might be relatively minor, but it will affect us all in some way, greater or large, greater or small, greater or large, what am I talking about? So when we consider all this, the first thing I want to say is it's okay not to be okay. It's perhaps a bit cliche to say it's okay not to be okay. It's perhaps something that we say a lot, but I want to keep saying it because I don't think we really give ourselves permission to not be okay. To really acknowledge that, yeah, I'm really quite poorly or I'm really struggling right now is a really brave and shouldn't be, but it is a very difficult thing. we're very often taught to kind of bottle it up and keep calm and carry on, and that's very often unhelpful as well. So first thing I want to say is it's okay not to be okay. I also want to say that to be able to look after ourselves during the pandemic, we need to be able to really think about our mental health, even if we're managing okay. The more we kind of acknowledge and recognize where our mental health is, because it will be going up and down, and the more aware and the more active we can be in responding when our mental health starts dropping down. Okay, so a few things that we can consider and that we can do to look after ourselves at the moment and in general. And one of them is to really be aware of the news and the media. There's a lot of news that's very live and very quick and very fast paced, and it always seems to be changing at the moment. And that's the same at any point in time, I guess, especially in the modern era with the internet and social media. But particularly right now during the pandemic, it can be particularly tricky because there's a huge amount of content being produced all the time around coronavirus and the pandemic. So my question to you would be a little bit different to maybe what you hear a lot of. People might hear, you've got to limit your social media use, so you've got to limit the amount of times you look at the news or the amount of minutes you watch the news for. My question to you would be to really think about when I watch the news, what's helpful and unhelpful about that. Because we need to stay up to date. Realistically, we need to know what the latest guidance is, but we don't need to know every second of every day. So my question to you would be, at what point does it become unhelpful? Some people might have a particular interest in the news or the media, and they might really enjoy maybe not the right word, but they might really engage with the media and reading about current affairs and the economics of it and the epidemiology behind it and health issues and so on. Other people might listen to the news or watch the news, and their anxiety might start creeping up and up and up and up until it becomes really unmanageable. So we need to ask ourselves, when does it become unhelpful, and how do I reduce it if it's becoming unhelpful? But don't just blindly kind of make life changes or routine changes. Really think about what does listening to the news mean to me? Is it helpful or unhelpful? Something else we can do, and it's a little bit hard to do if you've not really done it much before, and that's around really listening to how you're talking to yourself, how you're doing your self-talk. We all have this internal conversation. Very often we're not very aware of it, but we all talk to ourselves in some way. And really listen out for things like, I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be doing that. Because that's where we're kind of telling ourselves off, because we've got these expectations from somewhere that maybe somebody else is doing something better than us, or somebody else is doing something we should be doing, and those shoulds or coulds, or I could be doing something else, or I could be doing this or that, they can really knock our confidence and knock our self-esteem and our mood down, really. So really watch out for them, and when you hear them, I should be doing this, think, why should I be doing that? Is that realistic? Is that actually helpful right now? If I could actually do that thing, why would that be better? Why would that be different? And sort of interrogate those kind of thoughts that we have that might be quite unhelpful. It's a really difficult skill that I'm probably oversimplifying here, but if it generates a thought or an idea for you, then that's the job done, really, in terms of what we're hoping for on this call today. Something else that we can think about is about the amount we worry. Worry or anxiety is a fear of something that might happen in the future. So it's this anticipation of something fearful or scary, and it's innate within us. It's something that we all do. It's a prediction that will keep us safe, perhaps. But very often, especially in the modern world, we kind of get wrapped up in worry. And the more we worry, maybe those what if thoughts, what if this, what if that, we almost create these trees, these spiraling complex ideas of worry builds on worry, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they get really unmanageable. So what we need to be able to do is recognize and stop when we're having a worry. Recognize it and go, whoa, hang on, I'm starting to worry here. And instead of what if, we could ask ourselves, what would I do? What would I do if that was to happen? And if we find ourselves getting caught up in these worries, it can be helpful to slow down, write it down, and ask yourself, can I do something about this worry right now? And if you can, okay, is that realistic? Is that proportionate? Is that sensible? And if it's something that I can't do something about right now, let me write it down, or let me tell a friend or a parent or a carer or whoever, whatever your context is, and come back to it later. Because believe it or not, most of our worries really preoccupy us in the moment. But when we really try and sit down and focus on it, they tend to get a bit fuzzy. And that's because the worries work best and they get stronger in the background of our brain, where we're not really focusing on it, but it's kind of consuming us at the same time. So what we can try and do is slow down those worries, write them down, delay them, come back to them later. Another thing we can consider here as well is around uncertainty. Those kind of future orientated worries and things that cause us stress, they live off uncertainty. And the pandemic right now is full of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know so many things about what might happen next, or about what restrictions might change. And that uncertainty really fuels our worry and our anxiety. And the difficult thing is we can't really change the worry. We can't really change the uncertainty. We can't get rid of the uncertainty. But what we can do is to try and increase the amount we tolerate that uncertainty. Because it's the intolerance of uncertainty that really causes us difficulty. So what we can do is think about, what can I have control over? What can I do that's helpful? What can I do right now that might be helpful? For example, it might be thinking about what can I do that might be helpful for my own mental health? What can I do that might be helpful for other people in my life? Really focus on what is within your kind of range of control and ability, really. And because the idea of this global pandemic gets really big in our head and creates so much uncertainty and so much sort of generates so much kind of global catastrophizing in a way. We just need to be able to focus local and think, what can I do right now that's helpful to me, my friends and my family? As well as focusing on what we can control, another thing we can think about here is thinking about grounding ourselves, really grounding ourselves in the moment. One of the things we can do is think about 5 things I can see, 4 things that I can touch, 3 things that I can hear, 2 things that I can smell, and 1 thing that I can taste. And the idea is we ground ourselves right in the moment to be able to reduce this amount of kind of floating worry and anxiety that we're generating, and focus right here, right now. What can I do that's helpful? So there's some ideas. Let me know what you think in the comments. As you watch this video, or make a note and ask me later. I'm really interested to hear what you're saying. I'm going to pass over to Kiwi in a second. I suppose to summarise it, is that we've all got resources to be able to cope, because we've made this far and we've survived this far in life, and we can build on the resources we've already got, and maybe add a few more things to our toolkit. But I'll hand over to Kiwi now so he can have a few words to say.
Lovely. Thank you, Jay, and thank you first of all for inviting me so that we can do this collaboration. I know it's been a long time coming, but we're finally here. So as Jay said, so my name's Kiwi. My kind of background and experience around mental health is very much a personal one, and it stemmed from 5 years of my life where quite a lot of traumatic things happened. So first off, I was diagnosed with cancer, with chronic myeloid leukemia. I consider myself one of the lucky ones because I get to live. I essentially have to take low dose chemotherapy every day, but which is the downside. I have side effects which prevent me from doing operational duties as a police officer, but I get to live. So actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's quite good. And I've always kept that positive mental attitude whenever I was diagnosed. I always tried to see the positive side of it. I tried to just do the best that I could. And it wasn't because I'm anything special. I think that's just the way I've always viewed life. I've always viewed life as the glass half full. My experience around depression wasn't really personal. I used to be a drug and alcohol practitioner, so I knew about depression from speaking to several clients who'd talked about depression. I worked in Feltham Young Offenders Prison. I worked in Wormwood Scrubs. So I worked with lots and lots of, it was then young men, young adults and men who had experienced depression because of previous experiences. And I knew from a clinical aspect, I knew what depression was. But I didn't really I couldn't experience it. So when people could tell me, I could empathize quite a lot because I could physically see those people and the difficulties they were facing, but I couldn't experience it myself. And so when I was diagnosed with cancer, I tried to be as positive as I could. I tried to just get on with it. And the challenges that I came up with weren't really so much around cancer. Actually, it was after that I got married very quickly because we weren't sure what was going to happen with my cancer, and then I got separated. And then I separated from my ex-wife, and again that was another quite a traumatic thing. To go through a divorce, it's quite a big thing, and it kind of added into as I described my depression and what I went through. I describe it as an elastic band, and the cancer made the elastic band stretch a little bit, and then getting a divorce stretched it even further. And then once I'd started to process the divorce, get it all sorted, I had counselling, and I'm not afraid to admit that. I'll talk about my view on counselling and how I see the medical terminology. But in 2015, I went through from April till November. I unfortunately suffered six bereavements, family members and a close friend who sadly took their own life. And it was and even talking about it now, it draws up a lot of emotions. But actually, one of the things it draws up is it's disbelief. And when most people say that, when I say that to most people, they almost do that double take of, did you just say 6 bereavements in 7 months? I was like, yeah. And so it was a real challenging time. And again, that elastic band really, really stretched. And because those bereavements were in such close proximity, I didn't have time to deal with those. And I didn't really understand how to deal with them. So I just dealt with them as best as I could. And unfortunately, what had happened is once 2015 was over, it was a fairly not great year. I then just threw myself into work in 2016. So I threw myself into volunteering for the Scouts. I threw myself into work. I threw myself into socialising and going out. And what I now know is the big thing that I was doing was just, I was just avoiding. It was a massive amount of avoidance. And at some point, unfortunately, that elastic band snapped. And when it did, that's when everything just came crashing on top of me. And how I describe it to a lot of people is that it just felt like a big, big, big dark cloud was just over my head. And I couldn't see the light. And I'm not afraid to admit it, that I had some really unpleasant thoughts, some really, really dark thoughts, which at one point I was embarrassed of. But now I'm not proud of them at all. Just want to say that, but they happened, and I'm not embarrassed of them. They were part of my journey. They were part of my therapy that I had to go through. So when I talk about this, and there's quite a lot to digest there. So I'll let that settle in for a second. And this is going to be a pre-recorded video, so you need to pause it and go away for a second and make a cup of tea. That's absolutely fine. But the thing that I say to a lot of people is that when they hear that summary of my 5 years, they often can't believe it. They're often in disbelief at, how did you even go through all that? How did that even happen? And the short answer is I don't know why. I know how it happened, but I don't know why it happened. And actually, what I've come to realize is the why doesn't matter. It's happened. We have to deal with it. Because we could ask ourselves why and why and why for a long, long, long time. And I think that, we could theorize over this and, philosophize over it and perhaps get into a little bit of religious studies. And, it could go so far. Personally, I just don't think it helps to keep saying why. But what I try to say to a lot of people is that my story is just my story. And I use this analogy because what I found is when I've done talks about my mental health and I've talked about this sort of stuff, it's quite powerful and it's quite personal. But a lot of people have always said, "Oh, well, I'm not sure I could go through counselling," or "I'm not sure I could say that but you went through so much, Kiwi. You went through so much." And what I say to them is, look, if you walked into a library, and in that library was millions and billions of books, all of those books would look the same, because on the outside, we're all humans, we all bleed, we all breathe, we all have mental health well-being, we have social health, and we have physical health. All of us do. So on the face of it, we're all the same. But actually, it's only until you open up the book that we see what's inside. Now, if you were to look at me from the outside, you couldn't tell which book was mine. And that's the point that I try and say to people, is that my story is just my story. It doesn't matter that what I went through is much, supposedly, and I'll put inverted commas here, is much worse than what somebody else went through. Or I went through less than somebody else did. Actually, when we do that, we start comparing and we think, well, because they've done this and they've done that and I've done this, so therefore I'm not allowed to feel like this. Actually, you are. Your story is your story. And whatever causes you to have either anxiety or depression or, dark thoughts, it's not right or wrong whether your story is big or small. That's irrelevant. And it's really important that I try and get this point across, because I guess I can say it from the viewpoint that I've been through a lot of challenging stuff in 5 years. Yes, I accept that. But I also accept that my story is just my story. It doesn't make it any better than anybody else's. And what I choose to do now, I guess, is to try and share what I've been through. So I have a social media channel, and I do wellbeing talks, and I do stuff that I don't know if it's going to make any difference. I don't know if when I send a meme out, I don't know how many people are going to see it or how many people it's going to make feel better. But if one person sees it and it makes them feel better, well, then I've done what I wanted to do. And that's really important. And the thing that I would say within this time of coronavirus, I live with depression. That dark cloud that I have over my head has just gone away. It hasn't gone away completely. It's still there, and it will come back. Some people describe it as the black dog, and my analogy, I guess, how I described my depression was the dark cloud. And what helped that dark cloud go away was the same as any weather. Weather changes throughout the seasons because that's the way weather does. What helped me was having counselling and having my friends to support me. And we talked about this earlier on. So an analogy that I try and use to try and get my head around when I try and explain to people when they say, well, you've had counselling, Kiwi, what did it do? And I use the same analogy that I did when I was in hospital. Now, I was in hospital for 8 days. I went down to about 7.5 stone. I couldn't walk 10 meters. And I was in quite a bad way. The first 3 months was touch and go. They weren't sure whether I was going to live or die. And when you're 31 years old and you've been told, well, actually, you might hit your 35th birthday. I'm thinking, well, actually, I really do want to hit my 35th birthday. What do you mean I might be lucky? How does that even work? But I needed to be in hospital. When I was in hospital, those days that they gave me medication, they gave me the antibiotics and everything else, that was my treatment. I needed that treatment to help me better. And when I got better, I recovered when I was at home. Treatment for hospital, recovery for home. Now, when I use that analogy, people understand that. They say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But when we talk about mental health well-being, people kind of like have that funny look of, well, what does that mean? And what I try and explain to people is when I talk about counselling, I say counselling is like treatment. When you talk about counselling, you're not going to have that blue light moment, that penny dropping in the counselling session where straight away it happens. It happens when you've left the counselling session, when you're walking to the tube station or the bus stop or whatever it might be, or you see somebody drinking a coffee in a certain way or a leaf dropping and you think, oh, wow, that makes sense. And the reason that I say that is because it's really, really important. The treatment happens in the counselling room. The recovery happens away from it. And it happens whilst you're living your life, whilst you're enjoying your life with your friends and family and loved ones. And the reason that I say that, because in hospital, most of us can't have recovery unless you have treatment. And mental health well-being is exactly the same as our physical health well-being. It's no difference. So if treatment has to be counselling, then by very nature, the recovery is going to happen at home. But it can't happen unless we do the treatment bit. So I've kind of digressed and just talked about a whole load of stuff. As I suspect Jay probably thought I would. But yeah, so that's kind of my story, and in snippet, and why I'm really passionate about kind of mental health well-being.
Lovely. So it's so obvious to hear your passion, Kiwi, and your interest in the subject and the kind of topic, really. What would be your advice to somebody right now experiencing anxiety or stress around the pandemic and the kind of uncertainty that it brings? What would be your kind of advice?
I think the one thing would be, do what matters to you. Do what's going to make you happy, and whatever that is, it's fine. For me personally, the thing that helped me was exercising. We were talking about this earlier on. When I first went into the pandemic, I wasn't particularly in great shape. I wasn't unhealthy, but by any stretch of the imagination. But I wanted to get in better shape. And when I first worked out and did a workout about 7 weeks ago, I did it for about 10 minutes and I was out of breath. I had to rest for 2 days because I just everywhere was hurting. But over time, I got better. And what I really realised in this time of lockdown is that doing exercise really makes me happy. Like really, really makes me happy. So it doesn't matter if I do it 3 times a week, or it doesn't matter if I do it once a week. In fact, I want to do it 3 times a week because I really enjoy doing it. It makes me happy. It makes me smile. But that's what I would say to you. If for you it's painting a mug and painting pictures, or going out in the garden, or just watching birds, who cares? If it makes you happy, then that's good. That's great. If it inside of you, if it makes you feel good, then to me, that's what you should do. And also, I guess, echoing on what Jay said earlier on, was it's okay not to be okay. And there are going to be times where you're going to have anxiety. I've had anxiety through this pandemic. It's happened to me. I've had moments where I've had to really, really delve back deep into that whole coping strategies of treatment. How do I deal with my anxiety today? What am I going to do? I have to tackle it head on. How am I going to do that? Well, I've got to remember my coping strategies. So I guess to me that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Thank you. I suppose quick question then. The pandemic, it's obviously a lot of things coming together really to cause this difficulty, and one of those big things is physical health and mental health kind of combining around the actual physical aspects of the coronavirus, but also maybe working in a different way, or maybe being in social distancing at home. It's going to affect our physical health and mental health, really. And how do you think those two things come together, physical and mental health?
I think for me they go hand in hand. So I think when you're doing some sort of physical activity, you stimulate your mental health well-being. And there's obviously science behind that. I know that. We talk about endorphins, and doing physical activity releases the endorphins. And then we all know that they're part of that feel-good factor. We all know that. But what I say to people is, when you combine physical activity with mental health, people immediately assume you have to do like 100 press-ups, or you have to do X, Y, and Z. Actually, you don't. By doing some Pilates, or doing some yoga, or even just walking up and down, that's physical health, because you're moving and doing something. To me, that's what I see, the real practical side of it. And when I look at how that impacts mental health well-being, I guess I can only go from my own experience. And with mental health well-being, one of the things that I associate this with is that you lose control. And I had this a lot when I was diagnosed. I still got cancer, but when I talk about my cancer diagnosis, I talk a lot about losing control, not having any control in your life. You're told when to go to hospital. You're told that you need to take treatment. You're told you need to do this. A massive element of your life is gone. And actually, during this pandemic, we're in exactly a similar situation. A lot of our control is gone. And the way that I dealt with that particular aspect of my mental health was that exercise for me was the control that I could have back in my life. Because I knew that and I know this from reflection now, I didn't know this at the time, but I know that when I went to do a workout on day one, I could do 5 press-ups. And then 2 days later, I went back, I could do 6 press-ups. And then 4 days later, I could do more press-ups, and so on and so forth. But the whole point is that it's stretched around your own physical, it's around your own control. Getting that control back in your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I've got a question for you.
Go on.
So you and I are two men talking about mental health well-being. Society says, and people say that men often find it difficult to talk about mental health well-being and their feelings, or the stereotypes say that. And maybe that's changed. What would your advice be to men to overcome that, I guess?
Yeah, I suppose that's a really good question. I think you're absolutely right. There's a stereotype. Perhaps it's changing. I don't know. But there's certainly a belief there that people that the men find it harder talking about feelings. And from a mental health point of view, we need to teach boys and girls from a very young age how to talk about feelings, how to express themselves, how to how to label emotions, and that needs to happen nursery and sort of when you first start to speak at that kind of age. That needs to go right across the age ranges, primary school, secondary school, and then we need to be able to teach people in the workplace and teach people at university and in all areas of life, really, how to talk about mental health. So there's a whole kind of population thing we need to do, which we are doing. There's been a lot of change. I suppose when you think about it on a local level, when you think about you and your mates and what you might need to do, I'm going to turn a light on. It's getting dark. And when you think about you and your mates, what can you do practically? And one of those things is to start small. People often have the idea that you've got to have full disclosure and talk about everything you're feeling right there and then. And start small, little bits. And really pick the mates you start having an open conversation with. It's totally okay to have some friends you just play football with, and some friends that you maybe go and have a pint with, or somebody that you ring up now and again. You might have different friends and different mates for they might have different values and different different purposes in your life, or different kind of meaning in your life, and that's okay too. But start small, do it in small steps, try and be open, but see how they get on with it as well. You might want to start it up with, I was listening to a YouTube video and they were talking about male mental health. Have you ever had much of a question? You ever talked about mental health much at all? There might be a little opener that you can use as a way to kind of start that up and kind of gain their perspective first. So you start small, little bit. It can be really easy. It's much easier to avoid in the short term, avoid talking about it. But if there's something that you really want to share with somebody, it's going to make it worse if you kind of hold that back and don't share it. So the initially it's hard work to share and to open up, but actually very often it goes really well and people are able to have a good conversation. What about you, Kiwi? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to my friends about having cancer, it seemed to be a bit of an easier conversation, and people really kind of understood that, and they could empathise with it a little bit more. But when I mentioned the word depression, and sort of said, I'm having these depressive thoughts, some reactions, I'm not going to mention their names, but some reactions was, well, can you not just try and be happy, Kiwi?
Yeah.
I was like, well, it's not so much of that, mate.
You tried being happy, like
It
was that easy.
Yeah, and it's quite funny when I think back on it, and I think, wow, like, did you actually just say that? And I think it's really difficult. I think sometimes people just don't understand what depression is, because in their head they think, well, actually, but I haven't got it. So if I haven't got it, why have you got it? That doesn't make sense. So maybe it isn't depression. Maybe it's just you, being a little bit sad. And it was really interesting when I had to have those conversations with some of my friends, that the best conversations that we had were the ones that we didn't plan. And we went and played golf. One of our friends, Tom, we just went and played golf, and that was it. I can't remember what hole it was on. We probably lost the fifth ball by that point. But at some point, I just opened up and started talking. Another one of our friends, Chip, we went and just watched the film. We didn't talk about it for about 3.5 hours. We watched 2 films, and then afterwards, I did. And it was, I guess it's, the reason that I use those 2 comparisons is because they're completely different in terms of context. One of them, I went out and did some physical activity, and the conversation just happened. And another one, we were 2 best mates who just sat there because we've known each other for so long that we could sit there for 3.5 hours in silence, and it wasn't an issue. But we both knew when to talk about it. And it was really interesting, actually. I remember when I was diagnosed, it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks on, and the rugby was on. And my friends didn't know whether or not to invite me out to go and watch the rugby, because I wasn't drinking at the time, because I was on much stronger medication. So I was advised by the doctors I just couldn't drink. So I still went out, and it was quite funny. There was a bit of an awkward silence when somebody said something. They weren't sure whether I was going to laugh or cry or be upset. And one of my mates said, "Kiwi, stop being such a tight one and just get the round, and just because you're drinking a soft drink, and it just broke the ice, And as the evening went on, that they got more and more inebriated, but one at a time, they all wanted to talk to me and just sort of say, look, it's all going to be okay, Kiwi. We're here for you, And there are a few tears, Have me and my friends, wrote a blog about it and talked about it in open? No, it's a moment that, some of them might not even remember. But the point is that however that conversation is going to be had, it's just going to happen. And when I say that, there's a 2-pronged here. It's not just waiting for it to happen. One of you has to instigate it. So what I would say to people, if you know that you've got a friend and they're going through a challenging time, be the one to instigate that conversation, but be the one to say, are you okay? Are you okay? And there's that whole analogy, isn't there, Jay? I saw it a little while ago. It's the are you okay 3 times. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Are you okay though? No, I'm not okay. And I think, I'm not saying go and knock on people's houses and ask them 50,000 times if they're okay, but you're going to know. If you've got friends, you're going to know if they're in a tough place. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, wonderful, and that's really good to hear. And I laughed when you said about people, saying, "Oh, you could be happier," and it's really easy to respond unhelpfully when somebody is saying something quite emotional or quite difficult. So I suppose my laugh there was more around just recognizing how awkward it can be if you're uncomfortable with what you're hearing. And actually, sometimes it's a case of not responding and then just listening and acknowledge, respond maybe non-verbally. And sometimes, I think it's Brené Brown that made this phrase quite famous. She's got a brilliant video around empathy versus sympathy, and one of the things that it's a very well used phrase perhaps, but the phrase is around I'm not sure what to say right now, but I'm so glad you've told me, and that phrase can get you out of a lot of that kind of anxiety of what do I say, because you don't have to know what to say. You can just be really pleased that person's actually told you. And I think that's a really important thing just for us to kind of recognize. So in the nature of that, really, Kiwi, I'm really glad that you've been so open with us tonight and been able to share your experiences. Thank you very much for that. It takes a lot of courage to be able to be open and vulnerable, especially on a video that's being recorded. So really appreciate that. And thank you very much for your time on this call. And if anybody's watching this video and has any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. We'll keep an eye on them so that we can respond and write back. But that's all from us for this video. Thank you very much. Do let us know if you've got any ideas of any other topics as well for any similar videos. It's not the highest tech video you'll have ever listened to, but I hope you enjoyed and got along okay with it. And all the best for now and the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.